On February 24, 1986, Sherry Rasmussen appeared to be leading an ideal existence. She was young, had recently tied the knot with the love of her life, and had excelled in her nursing profession. Sherry was a bright light for everyone around her, according to her large network of close friends, family, and acquaintances. She informed her spouse that morning that she wasn't sure she would report to work that day and made the decision to take a sick day. She didn't particularly enjoy the topic of the presentation she had to give at work. Her husband John gave her a final kiss, assured her he wouldn't return home too late, and departed for work. To check on Sherry, John had been attempting to get in touch with her all day. He thought she had gone to work at first, but the hospital informed him she hadn't arrived when he called. Though more irritated that she hadn't informed him that she had left, he wasn't concerned. She would constantly remind him to turn on the answering machine before leaving the house. He was therefore shocked that she hadn't turned it on. When he got home, Sherry's car was gone, and there was glass from a broken patio door in the driveway. He became more and more irritated, thinking Sherry had backed the car into something and it collapsed and cracked the window. He never considers the possibility that something may be amiss in light of all these strange events. He begins to notice other oddities. The living room was a mess, with furniture strewn around, broken glass, and a bloody handprint near to the panic button on their home alarm system. The entrance leading from the garage into the house was slightly ajar. John noticed that Sherry was still wearing her nightgown when he left her laying still on the floor as everything started to come together for her. She was nearly unrecognizable due to the heavy beatings to her face, and her body was quite chilly to the touch of him. When an upset John dials 911, he is unable to communicate with the operator, who is attempting to find out what is going on. When the police arrived on the scene, they soon concluded that Sherry had fought to the end. When John left for work that morning, he last sought his wife. He informed the police. They observed that John was rendered totally unable following the loss of his wife, and they thought his response was genuine. Sherry possessed a high level of intelligence. As soon as she was 16 years old, she enrolled in college and immediately fell in love with the nursing profession. Her mission in life was to be of service to other people. When Sherry was in her late 20s, she had already worked her way up through the ranks to become an instructor. She had a strong interest in teaching nursing students and had reached this position. It was at a college party that she originally became acquainted with John, a student who was majoring in mechanical engineering. In a short amount of time, they became a couple, and he moved into her condo. They tied the knot in November of 1985, making them husband and wife. On the other hand, worrying occurrences began to take place in their relationship not too much longer after they had been together. In the aftermath of their engagement party, a woman had arrived at their residence, carrying skis and dressed in a provocative manner for the purpose of engaging in physical activity. She had insisted on having a conversation with John. Sherry was informed by John that the woman in question was Stephanie Lazarus, who had previously been her girlfriend. It was his promise to Stephanie that he would honor his vow to wax her skis, and he gave her the assurance that they would continue to be friends. Sherry was incensed by the fact that this woman believed it was acceptable to simply walk up at their house without giving any prior notice. Additionally, it was the first time she had learned that her fiancé was still seeing his ex-girlfriend she had previously dated. She conveyed to John that she did not wish for him to make contact with Stephanie. Nonetheless, he counseled her to refrain from being envious and that her actions were ridiculous. After a few days had passed, she came back with the skis that had been waxed, and this time she was dressed in full police garb, complete with a weapon. It was a source of concern for Sherry that Lazarus was a law enforcement officer. The fact that Lazarus had displayed an uncommon level of rage against her was something that she would convey to her closest friend. In the years that followed, whenever Lazarus was out on patrol, they would randomly come into contact with one another regularly. Sherry confided in her father that she was under the impression that Lazarus was pursuing her. Lazarus went to Sherry's place of employment, which was the hospital, after a few weeks had passed, and informed her that she and John had engaged in sexual activity after the engagement party. Lazarus made it abundantly apparent that, "If I can't have John, no one can." This was spoken with only a few weeks remaining until their wedding. Once again, Sherry was caught aback by the sudden appearance of this unknown person who continued to make her way into her life. When Sherry asked John about it right away, he acknowledged that it was real. Although that was the last time he hadn't done so since then, he had slept with Stephanie. He claimed it was so Stephanie could have closure. He told Sherry that his desire was to be with her and not with Stephanie. It demonstrates Lazarus's desperation to separate the couple. Sherry informed John that she was not to visit their home any longer, and that if they were to get married, he had to cut Stephanie out of his life. John followed Sherry's instructions, and their nuptials went ahead. In college, John and Stephanie struck up a friendship with one another. They were both on the same floor of their dorm room. They had been friends for a very long time and had worked out together on a regular basis with each other. An intelligent, athletic, and fiercely competitive lady, Stephanie was a woman. Both John and Stephanie shared a large number of friends, and they discovered that they shared a passion for both sports and partying. John and Stephanie finally became friends with benefits over a period of time during which they developed an open relationship with one another. Even though they were dating other people, they continued to find themselves drawn back to one another, even after they graduated from college. John had always considered the relationship to be rather casual. He later stated before the courts that it was nothing more than a group of children having a good time. After completing her undergraduate education, Stephanie took her family by surprise by submitting an application to the police academy. There was a short distance between John's engineering employment and the training academy. As a result, she was able to remain in close proximity to John. John broke the news to her that he was dating someone, and that this was a serious relationship on the occasion of her surprise birthday party, which was held for her 25th birthday. Stephanie could not find any solace. "I wish it didn't end the way it did, and I don't think I'll ever understand his decision," she said in a letter to John's mother. "May it be that I'll never understand his decision." It is clear from the entries she made in her journals during the time that she was going through a serious episode of depression. She had a strong belief that John would ultimately come to, and that they would be reunited at some point in the future. In the aftermath of their engagement ceremony, Stephanie expressed her affection for John and pleaded with him to refrain from marrying Sherry. Despite the fact that John asserted that he had conveyed to Stephanie that he would rather be with Sherry, the two friends did end up spending the night together. There was no doubt in Stephanie's mind that she intended to cause the happy couple to part ways. She did not let go of her obsession even after John had tied the knot. Each day, she would write about John and convince herself, and only herself, that Sherry was the only thing that stood between them and happiness. She would do this by writing about John. During the preliminary investigation, it was presumed that there had been a serious disagreement between the two parties. According to the findings of the investigations that were carried out by the police, the assault started in the upper stairway and extended into the living room for a period of time that was longer than 1 hour. The numerous wounds that were discovered on Sherry's face and body gave the impression that she had been involved in a violent altercation with the person who had attacked her. There was no doubt that Sherry was a tall and incredibly fit woman. If someone had sought to take Sherry down, they would have had a difficult time successful in their endeavor. The police have speculated that the offender may have had ample time to retrieve the firearm, cover it with a blanket in order to mask the sound, and then strike Sherry in the head. This is according to the police's speculation. It had been 3 times that Sherry had been shot, and each time, the bullets had been devastating. This is exactly how new police recruits are instructed to eliminate their opponents. It is believed that 2 trespassers entered the condominium shortly after John left for work, as stated by the police theory. As they were in the living area, unplugging various electronic devices, Sherry suddenly appeared from the bedroom, which caused them to be surprised. The story that Sherry was killed by two illegal immigrants began to take shape after a witness stated that they saw two Latino men in the vicinity of the crime scene. With the exception of Sherry's automobile, which was found 2 weeks later without any proof, the only item that had been taken was the marriage certificate that Sherry and John had obtained. This was the only item that had been taken, because there had been other break-ins prior to the murder, as well as another one that was carried out in a manner that was analogous 2 weeks later. The police continued to have faith in their burglar idea. This was due to the fact that there had been earlier break-ins. Despite the fact that a detective observed that Sherry's arm bore a bite mark that was more consistent with a female perpetrator, he chose to disregard the evidence because no one else shared his opinion. At this point in time, the key investigators working on the probe were likewise of an advanced age, excessively overworked, and investigating a lot of homicides and burglaries. The homicide of Sherry occurred in the midst of a major crime wave that was occurring in the city of Los Angeles. Cases would be filed away in evidence lockers, and detectives would go on to other issues when they were unable to locate any solid leads or suspects straight away. Friends and family were taken aback by the fact that John did not become more involved in the search for the person responsible for the murder of Sherry after she had been killed. Several months after the murder of his wife, John resigned from his position and departed the city of Los Angeles with his family. Nels Rasmussen, Sherry's father, and the police were certain that John was concealing information. John claimed to have instructed investigators to look into his ex-girlfriend. Records, however, indicate that he didn't lead investigators there for years. Sherry's father had taken up the role of her defender, persistently pressuring law enforcement to investigate her case. An upsetting story about John's ex-girlfriend paying a visit to Sherry at her place of employment and telling her that, "If I can't have John, no one can, and when this marriage doesn't work out, I'll be there to pick up the pieces," was something that Sherry had discussed with her friends in the weeks leading up to her suicide. An employee told the police that Sherry was unwilling to go anywhere without her ex-girlfriend, who frequently turned up armed and in uniform. This information was relayed to the police by a staff member. Sherry had been skeptical of this and accused John of being extremely jealous of Stephanie and her husband, despite the fact that John had repeatedly denied that Stephanie and her husband were still having an intimate relationship. As a result of the fact that John did not encourage Sherry to be terrified of Stephanie, Sherry disclosed to her friends that she was contemplating terminating their relationship before the couple got married. In addition, Sherry had informed her father a few days before her passing that she was being followed by a person who was dressed in men's clothing, but had eyes that were so penetrating that they could see right through you. After presenting this information, the lead detective informed Sherry's father that he was watching too much TV and that he was the source of the information. In the aftermath of the lead detective's retirement, the investigation was taken over by new detectives. It was brought to their attention that the case file was lacking a significant amount of information. During the course of the investigation, the only leads that were documented were those that had been given in the direction of the burglary. Even though John, Sherry's father, and Sherry's coworkers had all made statements, the police did not take any more action in response to the allegations. Because he never gave up on Sherry, Sherry's father is deserving of recognition from the detectives who are currently working. Throughout the investigation, Nels persisted in requesting that the police do DNA testing and reassess the case. To be more specific, he offered to pay for it himself as a volunteer. Following a number of years of unsuccessful attempts and a great number of appeals, he was finally successful in having the DNA evidence from the murder examined. As at this moment, it was no longer possible to deny justice because the evidence was so overwhelming that it could no longer be ignored. There was a bite mark on Sherry's arm, which was exactly where the DNA sample was taken. It was found by Sherry's investigation that the police had engaged in irresponsible behavior that was so poorly performed that it seemed to be a cover-up. Only because of this one factor was the person who was responsible for Sherry's death able to avoid being discovered for almost 20 years. A new unit was developed by the Los Angeles Police Department in the late 1990s, when DNA evidence became increasingly important for the conviction of criminals. The purpose of this new unit was to investigate forensic evidence that was acquired from cold case files and to search through numerous databases to see if anything could be uncovered. During the year 2004, Jennifer Butterworth was provided with the Rasmussen file. Butterworth brought to everyone's attention the fact that the proof was not found inside the box. The DNA evidence had been inspected by a law enforcement officer in the year 2003, but it had never been returned. She spent several days looking for it, and after a week of searching, she finally found it in the freezer that was placed at the back of the coroner's office facility. Following her examination of the samples, she provided confirmation that Sherry's DNA was present in the preponderance of the evidence. On the other hand, the bite mark sample was discovered to be female and did not belong to any of the records that were located in CODIS. The notion that two men were responsible for Sherry's death was raised as a result of this. Butterworth had begun going through the remaining case material from beginning to end. Sherry was being harassed by a woman, according to a statement that she read in a note that she had written. When she inquired as to whether or not this woman was interesting enough to warrant an investigation, her supervisor claimed that it was a burglary and gave her the order to leave the subject alone. After that, the case was put back into the closet. The Rasmussen file was discovered by detectives Jim Nuttall and Pete Barba in 2009, and they considered it to be intriguing because the DNA evidence revealed a female attacker rather than the two guys who had been assumed to have been responsible for Sherry's death for a long time. They were interested in the case from that point on. They made the decision to start from scratch. The condo was in the middle of a gated community surrounded by other apartments and was very visible during the day. The two observed that nothing of monetary value had been taken from the house. Additionally, there was no sign of forced entry, and the home alarm system had not been activated or tampered with. They could see that this had been set up as a burglary in order to impede a police investigation. The evidence suggested that the fight started upstairs and proceeded into the living area via the stairwell. At the top of the stairway, equipment that the robbers were allegedly going to steal was neatly arranged. This would have refuted the initial assumption by indicating that the robbers piled it after Sherry passed away. A record player in the stack had a bloody fingerprint on it as well, and it had only required a cursory examination to see past the staging. It appeared as though someone wearing gloves left the print. It confirmed, in their opinion, that the murderer was knowledgeable about police investigations. John was contacted by Detective Nuttall to obtain further information regarding the 5 female suspects they had. When Nuttall learned that John's ex-girlfriend worked in law enforcement, she was horrified. Furthermore, he knew Stephanie Lazarus, who was a detective at the time. She was presently in a higher position than him and worked in the well-known commercial crimes division. Stephanie Lazarus climbed to the top of the list of suspects quite quickly. Barba and Nuttall made assumptions about what they would do in the event of a murder. They decided that doing it on a day off would be ideal. Additionally, they couldn't use their duty gun because misplacing it would result in an investigation. Bringing a personal firearm or backup wouldn't. They also took into account their knowledge, as they had only been patrol officers for a short while. According to the documents, Lazarus had failed to report for duty on the day that the murder occurred. It had been 13 days since the murder when Lazarus revealed that a weapon with a caliber .38 had also been stolen. In conclusion, but certainly not least, a patrol officer that is out in the field would have the expertise necessary to trick a crime scene into seeming like a break-in. In the beginning of her career, Stephanie Lazarus worked for the Los Angeles Police Department as a beat cop officer. For as long as anyone can remember, Stephanie has been referred to as a cop's cop. In order to rise in the organization, she had put in a significant amount of hours of labor. Eventually, she was put in charge of the art theft detail assignment. Being a member of the art theft detail featured prominently in the role. One of the departments that was frequently featured in the media and drew a great deal of attention was this one. It was the position that one would imagine a killer would choose to associate with themselves, which was the contrary of what one would expect. Eventually, she rose through the ranks to become a respected detective. It was revealed by Nuttall and Barba that Lazarus had been following the Rasmussen cold case on a constant basis, frequently scrutinizing the evidence or inquiring about any leads that the investigators had. Due to the fact that Lazarus had never been involved in the investigation, this was regarded as particularly peculiar. In light of the fact that she had a personal history with the victim, she was not allowed to be handling anything that was connected to the case. Through his marriage to a fellow law enforcement officer in 1996, Lazarus was able to adopt a daughter. Lazarus appeared to be living a life that was considered to be ordinary, since he participated in school functions, worked effectively, and baked pastries for bake sales. As soon as the police began conducting interviews with Sherry's friends and relatives, they were taken aback to discover that there were no records of any of the situations in which Lazarus had followed or harassed Sherry. It would have been appropriate to identify Lazarus as a suspect and conduct an investigation from the very beginning. After obtaining a DNA sample from her, they began a search and rescue operation in an effort to retrieve something. As she was leaving a Costco, they witnessed her take a drink cup and throw it away in the garbage. After removing the cup, it was compared to the sample of the bite mark, which revealed that there was some degree of similarity between the two, a sufficient match to get a warrant for the investigation. The detectives started preparing for a low-key arrest. Only prosecutors and senior cops were shown the case. Everything had to be done with caution. They wished to keep her from learning anything. 12 officers were brought into the department before daybreak on the day of the arrest. Everyone was handed a search warrant and instructed to wait. Lazarus, meanwhile, started her daily journey into the city. The arrest was to be handled by a specific investigator, all of whom were chosen due to their lack of personal ties to Lazarus. The decision was made to extend an invitation to Lazarus to visit the Parker Center. In order for Lazarus to enter, she had to surrender her weapon, which is the reason why this location was selected. This action lowered the possibility that she might damage herself or other police while she was being arrested, which was a positive outcome. At the time, Lazarus was seated in a room with detectives Stearns and Cheramillo.
Let me ask you, you said you dated John. How long did you guys date?
I mean, well, are you guys, is this something, I mean, you said I was going to interview somebody about art and how you guys are...
She had the presumption that she would be questioning a suspect in one of her investigations. The way she questioned her was not very successful. In her denial, she denied having any involvement in the passing of Sherry. After the interrogation, Lazarus was taken into custody and put into custody. Following her arrest, her residence, vehicle, and place of employment were all searched. The cops discovered her journals that were written in the middle of the 1980s. It was in her notebooks that she expressed her feelings on John's proposal to Sherry and the accompanying depression that she experienced. In the 1990s, she continued to look for John Ruetten on the internet, as evidenced by the fact that her personal computer provided this information. As the investigation progressed, Lazarus's coworkers came forward to explain her unpredictable behavior at work. Everyone seemed startled that she was capable of murder, despite the fact that Lazarus was known as Spazarus at the office. Lazarus was granted an early retirement and had to have all of her ongoing cases dropped. Before her sentence hearing, Lazarus spent 6 months in Los Angeles County Jail. The judge set a $10 million bond because she was concerned Lazarus may leave the country or hurt herself. 2012 saw the start of her trial, and the narrative produced an amazing media spectacle. There wasn't a lot of evidence in this instance. The majority of the evidence had either never been gathered in the first place or had vanished over time. A better DNA sample was taken once Lazarus was taken into custody, and it was a perfect match. The journals, the DNA evidence, and the testimony that Lazarus had stalked Sherry were the primary points of testimony during the trial. Lazarus's attorneys contended that the evidence was improperly handled and wasn't supposed to be used in the trial. It came to light during the trial that Rutan and Lazarus had maintained communication in the years after Sherry's death. They'd even taken a Hawaii vacation together. Throughout the trial, Rutan sobbed multiple times and called his time with Lazarus a mistake. Lazarus was found guilty of first-degree murder by the jury. After serving her 27-year prison sentence, she will be eligible for parole at the age of 79. Nels Rasmussen and his spouse brought a civil complaint against the city following Lazarus' conviction. They said that Lazarus was actively shielded by the LAPD and that it was completely inappropriate for him to have access to the material over time. There was only one DNA sample left in the file after much of the original evidence vanished. The court ultimately dismissed their lawsuit. After they filed an appeal, a judge decided that they had to file the complaint by the year 2000 at the latest. Furthermore, in 2013, the California Supreme Court declined to take up the matter. Additionally, Jennifer Buttersworth, now Jennifer Francis, filed a civil lawsuit, claiming that the department was negligent and that evidence had been purposely destroyed. She also said that her managers retaliated against her until she promised to stop looking into the Rasmussen file because she persisted in doing so. After Lazarus was found guilty, she claimed that the harassment persisted. However, there was insufficient evidence to support her claims, and in 2019 a judge decided in favor of the city. When Lazarus appealed her conviction in 2013, the courts unanimously upheld the ruling. So, that's all for today, guys. Subscribe to my channel for more true crime stories, and be safe out there.